The controversial Trans Mountain pipeline expansion project obviously hitting a major speed bump today for people who wanted the project to go through. The Federal Court of Appeal basically striking down the Liberal government's approval of it, saying on at least one front, Indigenous groups weren't adequately consulted. Squamish Nation was one of the litigants. Now they're calling on the Prime Minister to completely abandon the Trans Mountain expansion. Their elected councillor and spokesperson Khelsilem joins us now. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So here we have a ruling from the Federal Court of Appeal basically saying the matter has to go back to the National Energy Board. There was not proper consultation from Ottawa with Indigenous groups, but also the idea of the environmental impact of a spill in the ocean. So these are issues to put back before the National Energy Board, but you say don't even take it back there. The Prime Minister should just cancel this. Well, what would be the grounds for just cancelling it outright?
Well, our contention from the very beginning is that the Trudeau government promised a new relationship with Indigenous peoples, but then behaved dishonorably in its conduct on this project. When we were meeting with the government about this project, they would send low-level bureaucrats who, in effect, were note takers. There was no meaningful conversation, and the way that we know this, and what the court decision reaffirmed, was that when we put forward our concerns, it didn't have a material impact on any of the final recommendations or approval processes when it got to Cabinet or when it got to the National Energy Board. So consultation, at the very minimum, means that when we have concerns, when we have things that need to be addressed as it relates to our rights, that it's going to have an impact on the end result. But it didn't. And so this whole process has been flawed from the beginning. And the Squamish Nation wants the Trudeau government to respect our rights. And this project has been, from our position, a very big risk, a very big concern, and none of our issues have been addressed through the consultation process or by any of the actions of the government.
Now, the government, we heard from our Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, on BNN Bloomberg just about an hour ago. They're still looking at the decision. But if we end up back before the National Energy Board and there is a consultation that I guess we feel that has respected the process, if they go back and they do it right in the way that the court said that they didn't do it, and the decision is still to go through with the project, is that something that you could live with?
Well, we as a nation, and I think Canada is a country of laws which has a constitution, and Section 35 of that constitution protects Indigenous rights. For the Squamish Nation, our rights are to our self-determination and to our jurisdiction over our territory. Vancouver, the harbour where this pipeline project would end and the tanker traffic would travel through, our perspective as a nation is that we want to have full jurisdiction over what happens in our territory, that we've been denied this right for too long, and that if we're going to engage in any sort of approval project for anything in our territory, we are the real landowners within our territory. We have title to this land with our other neighboring nations, and that a process has to be done that meets our standards, not just the government's.
Now, in terms of this debate, some people might not be aware that when it comes to First Nations and Aboriginals in British Columbia, not everyone is on the same side of the issue. There are other groups who have lands at different parts of the pipeline who are in favor. So how does that end up, I guess, muddying the consultation process? It wouldn't be just your group. There'll be some First Nations saying we want it to go through.
Well, I think every First Nation has the right to determine what happens within their territory. And so the Squamish Nation won't specifically talk about what happens in other people's territory. We can only talk about what happens in ours. And so every leadership, every elected leader, every people has to make a decision for themselves about what they think is in the right interests of their people and their future generations. From our perspective, with our territory, our inlet, our waters, we had to make the decision that our people stood behind us, which is that we needed to protect our territory. We didn't understand what was going into this pipeline. We didn't understand what was going to be transported through our territories. We didn't understand what would happen if there was an oil spill. All of these things were legitimate concerns based off of facts and analysis. And what the courts have said is that the whole process to address our concerns, to understand this information, was inadequate, it was flawed, and that even the Cabinet shouldn't have received the report from the NEB because it was so flawed.
Can you conceive of an outcome where you would feel better and in your group about this project, that in your mind, can anything be said that would assuage your concern? Say, listen, it's going to be all right for the waterways, it's going to be all right for your lands, and you could support the project?
Well, I think this is on the government as the crown to behave honorably, and it's up to them to decide how they're going to behave at this point and what information they're going to provide, what analysis they're going to do, what ways they are going to address their concerns. So we really leave it up to the government to decide how they want to move forward on this.
Now, on the other side, the people who are arguing in favor of the pipeline, some people make the economic argument that when it comes to oil and gas extraction mining in this country, it's about 8% of GDP, of our economy, and that we've been trying to cut our reliance on sending our crude to the Americans. But we can't do it unless we can build a pipeline either to the Pacific or to the Atlantic to get it out to Tidewater. Do you find any logic in their argument that we're getting stuck in a situation here where people don't want to invest in Canada's economy because we can't get any pipelines built?
Well, I think this fundamentally goes to what type of economy that we want to build for our country, what type of community we want to build for our country. And the city of Vancouver, which is, on track to become one of the greenest cities in the world, is building an economy based off of the green industry. And so the Squamish Nation, as well as many other First Nations, are interested in that new emerging alternative energy economy. But when it comes to this project and the way that this project has impacted investment or impacted the potential investment, again, goes back at the feet of the government and the way that they behaved in this. It's not the fault of First Nations that we have rights. It's not the fault of First Nations that we have to defend those rights. It's the fact that the government designed, both the previous government under Harper and this current government under Trudeau, that they designed a flawed process. So it's all on them. If they had behaved honorably, if they have done the right thing from the beginning, if they had respected our rights from the beginning, maybe we wouldn't be here. Maybe they shouldn't be fighting us in court every step of the way. But they choose to because they think that they can get a shortcut to these things, and they need to understand that Indigenous rights are real in Canada, that they are constitutionally protected, and that the Supreme Court's going to stand by us on that.
Now, the Trudeau government did tout earlier this year that it's revamped the process and that there would be broader consultation on these issues. When you took a look at the changes that they announced earlier this year, and presumably they would be in place if the issue indeed does land back before the National Energy Board, is that process fair to your mind?
No, it hasn't been at all. And in the current, the changes that they made, the minuscule changes that they made, one of the issues that we brought forward in our case was that when we were meeting with the government on this project, they were in effect sending low-level bureaucrats who were just note takers. That we were bringing, and the court said this, they included it in their judgment, we were bringing thorough and specific issues, and the government did not respond with thorough or specific responses. And so through this process, we were trying to meet and address these issues, and in effect, the government side would just take notes and leave, and that was it. And the way that what we argued in court was that the ultimate result, the material impact, that any of the discussions they had with our nation didn't change any of the outcomes. That the recommendations to cabinet, the decision of cabinet, none of it had a material impact based off the conversations they had with us. So that's not meaningful consultation. That is doing the bare minimum and thinking that they'll get away with it. And obviously today we're celebrating because the courts agreed with us.